I was born not here in the United States, but I was born in Peru. Ya tú sabes. I'm sorry about the World Cup, Papi. I cried too. Not really. But at the time in Peru when I was born, there was a specific situation that was going on there that led to my immigration here. I was born in a time in which Maoist guerrillas were fighting with a CIA-backed paramilitary. Right? In a time in which there was 2,000% inflation. And I think people can hear that and say, oh wow, that's a lot. But I don't think people really understand what that means, because this country hasn't seen that for almost 100 years. The point where, imagine you go into the store, doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, whatever orientation, however you identify yourself, that they don't give a fuck about. It's just the fact that that $100 does not equal $100 no more. It just equals $10. And then one day you go in there and the $100 equals $1. And then one day you go in there and they say, we don't even use this currency. These coins that you have, you can make earrings out of them and sell them for more than you could actually get for the coin. The metal itself is worth more when you melt it down. And in that middle of that turmoil, in order to find peace and quiet, my father decided to move us to Harlem in the 1980s. And it was a very, very interesting cultural exposure that I had at that particular time. One thing I always remind people is that I had a slight accent, right? Un acento. If I want to, I can still have an accent. It's not a problem for me. But my father was very, very adamant. He said, you know what? I want you to learn to speak English and understand it the way they do. And I want you to learn their history better than you know them. So you know what he used to do? He used to take me to the museum. And he would make me say the names of these complex dinosaurs, right? And in order to do that, I kept saying it again and again. And he said, it's because the muscles in your mouth aren't being used to speak English. That's why you'll constantly say Sprite or Español instead of Spanish or Sprite, right? Or pizza instead of pizza, right? Which I don't care. Dame una pizza, carajo. You sabe. I don't care. That doesn't bother me now. However, I'll say it however. I'll say pizza just to say it. But after saying Pachycephalosaurus 1,000,000 times, and Rhamphorhynchus, and Stegosaurus, and Diplodocus, and all these other dinosaurs, eventually I developed the way of speaking that you'll hear now, right? And what was interesting about this is that we compare these accents and how they're perceived by people. And it does tell a lot about the cultural dynamic that we're facing. And it does snatch away the false premise that people on the right will tell us that immigration has nothing to do with race. Really. So when someone comes with a French accent and they happen to be a light-skinned person, or a Swedish accent, why is that cute? And why is a person from India's accent offensive? Right? Why is a person from Mexico's accent offensive? Right? When a person from a European country's accent is seen as exotic and pretty and, oh, that's so cute. That's the reality that has been set up in this country. And I think it's because we never had a conversation about what happened when Europeans came here. And I'll interrupt my personal story just to tell that. When Europeans first came to America in mass, right, they did not just apply for citizenship, they applied for whiteness. Why? Because unless you were white, at that time, Greeks, Italians, Armenians, these people were not considered white. They were considered swarthy, part African. We don't want them here. We know they got a log in the fire because of the curly hair type people. But the reality was, if you were not considered white, you know what would happen? You would not be allowed to own property outside of the red line district. You would not get a loan from the bank. You would not be able to join the police department, which we've all discovered is the route to political power in local politics, holding office that is unmovable. You would not be able to join the fire department. And the fire department is interesting because they get paid off of every room that exists in a city. If you've ever been in a room, even this one, it'll say capacity, occupancy at the door. You see that occupancy right there? It says 227. Somebody had to pay the fire department for them to write that. And in many clubs, they put a bigger number than it should be, and they put money under the door. But the reality is that we were closed off to these things. And there are many cases in which people had applied for whiteness, and they were specifically told by the American government, I'm sorry, you're not white. There was a case of a Japanese man who said, well, you know what, my skin is actually whiter than the average white man. And written in the conversation of the response from the government, this government, the official response is, no, you belong to a Mongoloid race. You are not part of a white European race. Again, the reality check, what Paul Mooney used to call the nigger wake-up call for people. Because you think, oh, man, I'm here, I've got it, oh, no. Those people know who's white and who's not white. And in reality, that was the sickness of that racial disparity was injected into those politics. So the idea of the melting pot was really about melting down the races of Europe to create the ideology of a white person. And that was the invention of white people, because before that, you weren't just considered some huge splotting mass of whiteness. No, you had your own individual culture. Irish people had Gaelic, and they resented English being dumped upon them. Right? The people from the Baltic states, they had a Livonian crusade, which means they were forcibly converted to Christianity the same way we were. You ask any person from Greece, they resented Western Europe because during the Fourth Crusade, these people didn't attack anywhere in the Middle East. They sacked Constantinople. What does that teach us, right? If half the Crusades weren't against Muslims, who were they against? Other denominations of Christianity. Why am I bringing up all this history and relating it back to where we are today? Because without a proper history lesson, I don't think that we can have a conversation about anything having to do with immigration. And I think that it benefits people when they don't have to have the historical context involved in anything. They can just say at some point, well, that doesn't matter anymore. Until the facts, of course, come into their play and they say, oh, we want to accept these facts. I've dealt with people like that, especially from a religious perspective. I choose to call them salad bar Christians. Because they go to the Christian salad bar and they decide what they want. They decide to pick out this little passage about how, if you're gay, you're going to burn in hell for the rest of your life, which is not even in the Bible. And then they decide that dropping a bomb on a child is somehow less offensive than two people of the same sex kissing each other, or someone getting an abortion. Oh, okay. So that a person who's raped can't be available to have the pregnancy terminated, but you can drop a bomb on a school and you think that somehow that's collateral damage. You change the narrative so that nothing at all bears any semblance to some responsibility. And when I talk about responsibility, it's important because we've all given up some of our freedom for that responsibility that this quote-unquote government is supposed to show us. And what's sad is that I think we've all come to the conclusion, everyone in this room, that it's not really a capitalist system. It feels more like a Ponzi scheme, right? Like something you were never designed to win. Like a lottery in an Italian neighborhood in 1915 or something. Nobody was winning that. I think something else that has to be discussed is that as a young person, I can remember getting arrested a lot. And I was in trouble, and that's no secret to none of my fans. You know that I went to prison, you know that I got locked up. But what's not really in the story is the idea that every time I got arrested, I was constantly threatened by NYPD with deportation. And I never took it seriously, because I always thought that there are 5 steps before deportation. There are 3 JD cards, and then you have to be sent to Rikers or someone else for you to be considered for deportation. And I thought to myself, well, man, I'm 16, I don't have no papers. I'll do whatever I want to do. But as the arrest records started piling up more and more, I started to think to myself, wow, this is a possibility. However, I still had some kind of lifeline, some kind of life net, that I had other members of my family that were citizens. Right? So I still never experienced the harshness the way other people. However, I got to see that in my family, especially when my own cousin was deported recently. And I want to tell you his story without telling you his name, because it's very important, and I think it pertains exactly to what's going on with these children. My cousin was born on the spectrum, right? So at some point, we thought that we would come together as a family and that everything would work out and that we would have him with us. And believe me, I don't talk a lot about my personal family, so I'm trying to be as focused and not take it to heart in front of him. but it hurts to talk about this. It hurts me in a place that I don't talk about with most people. He was on the spectrum, and when he was incarcerated and put in this facility, he was thrown into solitary confinement for 5 months. He was strip searched constantly. Every time he spoke back, he said that they would routinely physically assault me. Now, being a person that has actually been incarcerated, going to prison, I can tell you about my first day in prison, when they were dividing the men and the women, right? They said the women are intake here and the men are here. And I always remember an old white lady gave a CO a fucking attitude and spit at him. And the CO cracked her in the head with a stick. And when she hit the floor, they took these 2 lightning rods and they started peeling her. And I always remember they dragged her in front of the men's cell and they looked at me, and he looked at me and the dude next to me, and he goes, if we'll do this to a white bitch, imagine what we'll do to one of you niggas when you get out of line. So if this is going on in a prison, what goes on in a place where they feel people aren't even people and they have no human rights? Now my cousin, he got fed up with this place. He said it was driving him even more crazy. He said, I can't control it. I don't even like that word crazy, but just the system itself implied that, right? Hardly any human communication. And when he was finally released and I saw him back in Peru, he started breaking down. He started imagining that there were voices there. We took him to a mental hospital, and we found out that he was developed bipolar psychosis, and he started hearing voices in his head. He started hearing people telling him to kill himself, that he would be better off without him. And I started asking him, I said, yo, what did these people tell you when you were there? What did they say to you? And he said that they told him that he should kill himself instead of taking up the resources of the people that live here. And I said, well, how is that not a direct correlation to how he feels about himself now? And then the question then becomes, if they're doing this to a 20, 21-year-old kid, and he can barely stand up to that, right? What happens when that kind of abuse is poured on to a 3, 4-year-old child? What happens when a 10-year-old child hears that? How do they process that? I understand that we have a group of lawyers here, and we need that army. But we also are going to need an army of healthcare professionals to deal with these children when they get out. Now, in about a week, I'm going to go to the border with a group called the Border Angels. You can follow them. They're on my Instagram, and they do work like water drops, and they work with the shelters that people are kept behind. And I'm going to visit the shelter where people are waiting to be reunited with their children. And what we're going to do is we're raising funds so that we can afford to hire workers, either social workers, mental health professionals, to deal with the trauma of reuniting these children. You see, I went to prison, but I come from a special species of people in prison. People that never got robbed, never got raped, never got slashed, because we like to fight and we knew how to fight. But you know what? Even though I have conversations with people that said, oh, you know, that same thing, I made it out intact, as we call it, but we didn't really come out unscathed. We were humiliated. Even the big diesel niggas, they don't like to talk and use that word humiliated, but when someone says, strip the fuck down naked, turn around and spread your ass cheeks and get on the ground, and a man is screaming for you to do that, you feel like you're being violated. Right? You feel like someone's trying to rape you. You feel like someone's taking away a piece of your manhood. And even though all these other things that are so stereotypical about prison never happened to you, every time you went and got a visit, that's what happened to you. For those of you who have people, friends, family that are locked up, remember, if you go visit them, they pay a price for you visiting them, right? And that's that strip search that they are the ones that are totally at the disposal to decide how far it goes. How invasive do we want to be? This guy gave me a fucked up attitude. I think he both something. Put something up his ass and find out if he has something there. What are you gonna do? Fight all the COs because you're such a big fucking tough guy? Oh, you down south, you're a big tough Sureño? Oh, up north, you're a big tough Norteño? They don't give a fuck about that. Nothing. Because you're not tough in there. I hear people say all the time, oh, the inmates run the prisons. How come they eat shit food, huh? How come they pay $7 a minute to talk to their families? You want to feel tough? I know that. I get that. I wanted to feel tough too. But it's hard to admit that you're a fucking slave.